Good evening, everyone. This is Professor Hill. This is a short video for our class, Introduction to Ethics Philosophy 2306 here at St. Philip's College for the first summer session of 2023. And today's Friday, June the 16th, the end of a long week, our second week. And that means that we've about finished reading chapter 2. We're now looking ahead to the essay, which is going to be due Sunday night at the end of this weekend. And you want to make sure that you're bringing over lots of key concepts and definitions from chapter 2 in our book, Doing Ethics by Louis Vaughn. And so that's kind of where we are. We've got an essay due Sunday night, all about reading chapter 2, applying it. And here's one thing that I want to mention. When the essays came in last Sunday night, and I was able to grade them on Monday and Tuesday, there was a couple things. One of which was, and I said this before, hey, please make sure you're bringing in the stuff from the chapter. And most people are getting that. There's a few people that, were losing some points because they didn't do that. So, but you got to bring in concept, definition, something from the chapter. And here's the other thing too, which is I was trying, I guess, especially with the first essay, to be relatively, lenient, understanding. We got to get the process down, read chapter 1. It's the first essay, that kind of stuff. But we also want to be careful about how we use our terms and definitions, not just from the chapter, but especially if we venture into the legal area. And here's my thing, which is this is a class about ethics. This isn't law school. You don't have to learn legal definitions and terms and stuff. But if you do bring them in, you want to make sure that you're using them accurately. And so, given the Jenny Lake case, which was complicated, there was some talk about, because she faced this difficult choice, right? Continue her chemotherapy or not. Continuing the chemotherapy, her life-saving therapy being recommended to her by her doctors, meant that one of the side effects, one of the consequences of that would be that she would end up losing the baby. It would terminate the pregnancy. Under no circumstances would that have been conceived of legally as murder. Okay? The fact of the matter is, there are lots of people who are pro-life, they're against abortion, and we can even have a whole conversation about Jenny Lake and the situation she was in terms of the definition of abortion. But it's also, but it's not murder, meaning that you could say something like, it's my moral opinion that abortion is as bad as murder. But what you can't say is just throw out some legal definition like abortion is murder, because it turns out it's not. I'll be happy to put into the modules why it's not and the details behind that. But it turns out that even before Roe v. Wade, abortions were not treated as murder. Now, after Roe v. Wade, they're not treated as murder. It's a different thing. Meaning that, and I want to be clear about this, no mother commits a murder if she seeks and has an abortion. Now, in the past, there have been prosecutions that were focused on the doctors, but even those were part of the reason why they didn't charge the women, in part because that would kind of put them on the same side and made prosecuting them more difficult. But there were lots of reasons for that. the law and the thinking was always that the woman involved was a second victim. That was the language that was kind of used by people who, again, were pro-life and opposed to abortion, and were trying to set up some kind of criminal structure to address this. This is a conversation that the country's having again now that Roe v. Wade's been overturned, but no place, and certainly not in Texas. Now, you might have read that there was a case a year ago where a woman in South Texas, there really was a grand jury that indicted a woman on murder charges for having an abortion. And what happened was the district attorney came in when he found out about it. They notified him immediately. He came in. He said, no, this is not how this works. Freed the woman from jail, literally apologized to her at the jail. He went personally, apologized to the woman in jail, and said, I will make sure this doesn't happen again because this was a mistake. And that's how it was treated. So if you look, that woman was not only not charged in the end, although there had been an indictment issued by a grand jury, it was overturned. The prosecutor used his prosecutorial discretion to say, that's not how we do this. That's not how we treat these things here. And again, I'll put all this into a link in the module, just in case you're interested. I mentioned all of this about the last essays because I'm getting questions about John, the paramedic. And did John murder this person? And the answer to that is it's even more complicated. And again, we're trying to stay on just the ethical side, the moral side. But the fact of the matter is, and I want to make sure you understand how this turned out, John was there and did not treat this person, and that person died. Now, normally the situation is if you're a person walking down the street and you see someone who's in a life-threatening situation, you might volunteer to help, but you don't have an obligation to do that. You don't have a duty to step in and help somebody, even if they're in a life-threatening situation. This is the whole thing. Like if you see somebody drowning, you don't have to jump in and swim out there to try to save them. Now, you could if you wanted to, and that would be a noble thing. That would be going above and beyond the call of duty, because you don't have a duty to do that. And let me be clear, there's this whole thing about Good Samaritan laws, which is that there's not going to be a positive obligation for you to act to save somebody. But the problem was people were saying, oh, I don't want to get involved because I might get sued. I don't want to, I don't want to get involved. And so they tried to pass what were called Good Samaritan laws to protect people, meaning that they wanted to give you a shield so that you could intervene and act heroically to help somebody without the fear or the obstacle there of a threat of being sued. In a world, people don't act because they don't want to get involved. They don't want to get sued. And again, just to be clear about this, the Good Samaritan laws are going to protect you if you act reasonably to help somebody. If you go in and you act badly, recklessly, make things worse, further injure the person, which happens, the Good Samaritan laws at that point aren't going to be a shield for you. You can violate those and put it this way, it's not going to be an excuse for your own bad actions if you now start to act recklessly and make things worse. A Good Samaritan law designed to help people acting reasonably won't shield you in that case. But this is all for people who are bystanders, people who are walking down the street. And again, I mentioned you don't have a duty to act. If you did so, you'd be going above and beyond the call of duty if you're a bystander. But here's the thing. Remember, we were talking about the drowning person on the beach. If you're a lifeguard, if you're sitting in the stand, with your little whistle and the little, life-saving float, it's actually your job to jump in and go try to save that person. That person, the lifeguard, does have a duty to act. They do have a special relationship to get out there and try to save that person. And that's the thing about John the paramedic. John the paramedic at that scene had because of his role. He was sent there as a paramedic. His job was to save this guy. So he did have a positive duty to act to save this person. And he was like, I'm not going to do it. So that's the big kind of applied ethics piece here. That's the reason it's not, John wasn't just a bystander. Okay. Now, what happened? This is a real case. What happened was the boss shows up out there. I mentioned this in one of my other videos because he called for another ambulance. They come out there. John doesn't act. The guy dies. But according to John, the fact of the matter is that the boss says, it's in your own best legal interest to just not say a damn word and shut up. And it turns out he took that advice and he did not cooperate. He remained silent. He got a lawyer. And there was enough, because you got to remember it's a fluid situation. Even if John had showed up and tried his best to save that guy's life, he might have died. He'd been stabbed. And so it would be really difficult to prosecute that case if you don't have great details, if you don't have a record of it. And again, in this situation, there just wasn't enough evidence with John sitting there silent to convict or to bring charges against him. So what happened was he was not ever charged in terms of being held criminally responsible for that person's death. No, the DA just didn't bring enough. There wasn't enough evidence. But that being said, he did lose his license. There was an investigation. And like anytime there's a dead body on the ground, there's going to be lots of investigations. And even with him remaining silent, especially in those situations, that's a professional misconduct hearing where there are different rules. They don't have the same safeguards and rights that you have in a criminal trial where your freedom is at risk. You might go to jail. Here, in a professional hearing, the worst that's going to happen to you is what happened to John, which is that he lost his license and can't be a paramedic again, which, by the way, is why he was in my class. He was gone back to school to retool, to do something else with his life because he wasn't going to be a paramedic anymore. Because there was at least enough evidence for them to find professional misconduct and to strip him of his license. I'll mention one last thing about this, which is that there was another paramedic at the scene. They went out in a team, but the way it was set up is that there was kind of one driver. There was one paramedic whose chief role was to be the driver. So like when they got to a scene, one paramedic is primarily doing the treatment, the medicine, the medical aspect of it. They get them into an ambulance. The other guy drives them back to the hospital while, the primary one is in the back working on the person the whole way back to the hospital. So they're both paramedics, but they're trained up to different levels and they're paid different salaries. The guy in the back has more training, gets paid more because he's back there doing the medical work. And the driver is also a paramedic and is trained up, but not as much because the primary role there is going to be driving the ambulance. Well, the driver was in a secondary support role and also was new. And this is an interesting piece, but it turns out I had heard this story. It happened in class. I'd been telling the story then for 2 or 3 years after it happened to my classes. And one of my colleagues, he and I talked about the story, and he also did it as a case study in his ethics class. Well, in his ethics class, a couple of years after this happened, one of his students says to him, you know what? I know the driver. I know the other guy. He's still a paramedic. He's a friend of mine. And man, I talked to him at length about this when it happened. And he felt really bad because he felt kind of paralyzed, like he didn't know what to do and was just kind of taking orders from the guy who was in charge. That's a small world, but I thought that was really interesting. So it wasn't the other driver, it was a friend of the other driver who said that he did really feel bad about that. Like maybe should have done more. Like he didn't know what to do, because his whole thing was to just be the driver and defer to the other more experienced, more senior, more trained paramedic, who in this case wasn't doing a damn thing. Anyway, so look, my point is that every citizen needs to have a working knowledge of our legal system and our civic government and how it works. And look, these days we're all getting a lesson in prosecutors and, grand juries and how they work and what's involved in the process. That's hopefully one nice thing that comes out of all of this is a civics lessons for people who are sitting around talking about the process. Who knew we would all be spending so much time talking about the Department of Justice and the FBI and federal versus state prosecutions and grand juries and how they work. But just keep focused on the moral and ethical part of this. This is an ethics class. It's not law school. But I am aware that there are legal issues at play here. And it does help to kind of do a compare and contrast, to say, I'm worried about these moral issues and there are all these other legal issues, because, that's the thing we've talked about a little bit already, which is that sometimes things can be legal, but not moral, or vice versa. And so it helps to compare and contrast the two when we're trying to get our hands on a difficult moral issue. All right. If you've got more specific questions, let me know. Contact me. I'm trying to respond to people as these things come in. But let me know if I can be of any help. All right. Take care. It's Friday night. It's the end of a long week. And I'm actually looking at some white-tailed deer out the window right now, which is kind of fun. Because let me tell you, it's hot, though. I think they're looking for water. I'm going to take them out a little agua. All right, take care, y'all. Let me know if I can be of help. Write me. In the meantime, keep reading, keep thinking, keep writing. Essays are due Sunday night.